we have our friends Tom Baber, a New Jersey IHOP franchisee. We have Mr. Todd Recknagel, managing partner of the 320 Capital Group and a franchisee of Massage Envy, who lives in Michigan. And we have Mr. Jesse Kaiser, who is the CEO of Kaiser Enterprises, Inc., and a franchisee of Sport Clips, OxyFresh, and Little Caesars, and he lives in St. Louis. All three gentlemen are distinguished members of the Franchisee Forum, and welcome to all three of you gentlemen. Thank you for being with us, and let's dig right in. Jesse, I want to start with you, and then maybe I'll ask this exact same question to Todd and Tom so that we get to know everybody. Jesse, tell us your small business story. Why did you go into franchising as opposed to pursuing a new kind of business?
Yeah, so I'll try to make this long story as fast as I can. So while in college and then thereafter college, this is like 97 through 99, started working for a technology startup during the .com time, was making great money. And I was still living in the same college town that I went to college with. And what do college kids eat? A lot of pizza. So I wanted to open up a pizza place. And there was a local mom and pop there. I was going to buy it, even had my younger brother working there just to get all the ins and outs, the recipes and everything, just in case they wouldn't sell it to us. We had a good idea what we could do. And my boss that I was still working for, but my boss was like, you should really just get into a franchise. And I said, well, what's a franchise? And he's like, they're going to teach you how to run a business. And that changed my life, because I could tell you that if my brother and I had purchased that local independent pizzeria, we'd have a very successful pizzeria, but we probably just have one. And so I think some of the biggest things that I got out of franchising, especially in the very first location or two, was 2 points that are really important. They're only unique in franchising. Number one, there's someone that already understands your business model and they can coach you through things. I was running my labor way too high. Truth of the matter was the volume was high enough. My bank account was still growing. So by all measures, I was successful, but Little Caesars, like, we're not going to approve you for a second location until you get all your metrics in line. Another one that I learned from Little Caesars too was, your cost of rent needs to be a certain percentage of your sales, and don't get ahead of that. And quite honestly, there's a lot of brands I know that they don't pay attention to that. And that's really important if you're dealing with brick and mortar. The other side to franchising that has nothing to do with the franchisor is the other franchisees. The things that I was able to learn, the shortcuts, the learning curves were shut in half because I was talking to people that had already done this. And the third secret to franchising that I like that no one really talks about is that if I had been that independent pizzeria, for me to acquire the guy down the road in another town, it's a different recipe, different ovens, different business model. Where, as an example, with the Sport Clips, all I really need to know is what your top line sales are and what your rent is. I can plug in everything else in my pro forma, and I can give you a really good bid for your business that I think is an attractable for both the seller and the buyer. And you don't get that in anything else other than franchising.
Jesse, that's great. Sounds like we should hire your old boss to advocate for IFA. Sounds
Absolutely.
Like a franchising hero. Thank you for that. Let's get to know Todd Recknagel. Todd, tell us a bit about why franchising has made sense for your
Sure.
career.
Similar story to Jesse from the restaurant business standpoint, but I started out as a banker and an investment banker in the early 90s, and actually have been in franchising now 30 years. So in 1993, bought a territory for Blimpie and Blimpie Subs and Salads. And so I was in the sandwich business in the 90s and became Blimpie's largest franchisee at that time. Was also an area developer and helped develop 50 stores in Michigan. And so after we sold out of the sandwich business, I partnered in with Service Brands and became CEO of Mr. Handyman and helped grow that with 300 locations and nearly 100 million in system volume. So kind of put Mr. Handyman on the map. Then I started to pivot a little bit more into private equity. And that was when I started the 320 Capital Group, partnered in with a couple of companies, helped Take 5 Oil Change grow to where they are today. I've actually been involved and partnered with over 10 franchisors and over 5 large multi-unit franchisees. So fast forward to today, we're partners in Office Pride, a commercial cleaning franchisor, and then also now the largest franchisee in Massage Envy with 95 units. And then we're also franchisee in Sola Salons, and we're soon to be the largest. We have 7 more stores under construction, so we have 51 open, and we'll shortly pass the 60 mark there. And so a lot of good growth, love franchising, been involved with the IFA over 20 years. So went on to the IFA board a little over 20 years ago as a franchisee. And for me, coming from banking and investment banking, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I was looking for a formula to take a lot of that risk on, a lot of the risk that Jesse just talked about. And so when you're a banker, you have a unique opportunity to see a lot of different business models, but it's really difficult to create one on your own. And so we see franchising just creating such value in the economy, taking out so much risk, employing so many people, providing so much diversity, that I've really been blessed in a 30-year career with a lot of different successful companies that I love franchising.
Love it. Thanks for sharing your great story, Todd. Let's welcome in Tom Baber. Tom, tell us why, if you would, franchising has made sense for you in your career.
I think I might be shorter because Jesse and Todd did a great job of describing why franchising is so strong, but I'll quickly give you where I started. 30 plus years ago, my first franchise, and I'm still a franchisee, although you didn't call it out, of Money Mailer. I had a couple small businesses, had a tanning salon, had an Italian restaurant, had a pizzeria, had a house cleaning business, and they were doing okay. It was fun doing those things. I'm sure like Jesse, it's a fun thing to do. But then I realized that there were people that could do it better than me. You know, I never forget the gentleman came in to sell me an ad at Money Mailer's, an advertising company. And so I also had an ad agency at that point, and we were doing the front and back end. And I said, "What are you doing?" It was basically all the front end, what I consider the fun stuff. The back end was horrible. Money Mailer did the back end a lot better. IHOP did a lot of things really well in that business, right? I was also in a cleaning franchise after I was independent. And the reason for those things is they did things really well. After I realized they did things well, I wanted to be a part of it. But once that happened, what I realized, just like Jesse and Todd did, is those brands are very scalable. The systems are strong. If you're in a strong brand, the SOPs are strong. You can train people to those systems, and they're innovating. There's no way an independent, like the three of us might have been back in the day, could innovate and keep up and do all the things we need to do. Forget what happened during first tax reform, which was a big deal for those that know it. But how about COVID and PPP 1 and 2 and ERC? On your own, it's impossible to navigate. And IFA and franchising in general made that really easy.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. So let's stay with Tom as we open it up with these 3 franchising leaders and great advocates. So the franchisor-franchisee relationship is what holds together this entire community. And we see these franchise relationship proposals, these bills popping up all across the country. Tom, what's your sense, what's your take on what these franchise relationship bills do, and how would they affect your business?
Yeah, wouldn't be great. So let me start with this. Those bills generally come from people that are well-meaning. They're trying to find a spot to correct the wrong. It seems that way, and it seems it's been that way the whole time. The thing is, they don't know, we've all lived this our whole life. They don't know how complicated the relationship is, and they're doing their best to understand it and then, put legislation against it. But what's the likely outcome when that happens? The likely outcome is to damage the business model, or that particular model they're going after. Here's the issue with that. You never just damage one leg. If you damage the franchisor, you think you are, the franchisee is going to be there, and the customers will be there, and certainly the employees will be there, and then vice versa. So whatever they're trying to do, they generally miss the mark. But in times it's self-inflicted. We have to look at ourselves in this model and say, how can we fix these things where legislation isn't involved? Because when legislation is involved, bad things are going to happen. The model's going to be damaged, or that particular brand or sector will be damaged. And everyone at that point is impacted. Values lost, equities lost, banks are unhappy, stakeholders are unhappy, and customers and ultimately are unhappy.
Mike, I knew you were going to ask about Arizona because it reminds me a little bit of this recent Julie Sue nomination. You know, I'm not as worried about my franchisor and being a large franchisee. We're working together. We're working together to try to build the brand, to try to hire employees, to try to do the best we can. And as a multi-unit franchisee, I think we have today about 2,500 employees. Probably about a third of them are in Arizona, and so a third of our clinics are in Arizona. And we're a great employer, providing all kinds of great wages, highest in the industry, benefits, diverse culture. You know, we have an amazing group of employees in our Massage Envy group, and so the current administration has nominated Julie Sue as the Secretary of Labor. And so Kristen Sinema and Mark Kelly, who are two of our senators, are folks that are friends of franchising. They appreciate the franchises in the state of Arizona. They appreciate small business. They're more or less in the middle. And they actually helped and worked with the IFA on the David Weil, knocking down the David Weil nomination. So now Julie Sue comes along, and she's not a friend of franchising. She was in the state labor group out in California, and now gets to potentially take her show to the national level. And that's a threat. That's a threat to franchisee and franchisor. We're the ones with the employee as the franchisees. We're the ones out operating every day. And all of a sudden, if the national, Secretary of Labor hates franchising, is looking to bring more regulations, that hurts our employees, that hurts our team, that hurts our franchisor, everything. And franchisee and franchisor have to stick together basically in that fight, because it's a threat to us all.
Todd, thank you. So Jesse, Todd has just said that there's a symbiotic relationship between franchisor and franchisee, and we all need to be involved at this season of the franchise business life cycle. What's your take on these franchise relationship bills? How important is it for franchisees to be involved in advocacy?
One thing I could tell you is if you are a franchisee and you're unhappy, there's several options. Number one, in franchising, your multiple when you sell is traditionally much higher than if you're an independent of anything. I'm looking around at job boards or business listings, and at best, it's 1 times earnings, maybe 1.5, 2. I could tell you the brands I'm involved in, it's 3.5 to 5.5. So, and that's because of franchising, because there's already pre-qualified buyers of interest in the industry that you're in. So I think that's huge. If you're just not happy, this is the best exit, is to sell your business, because you're going to get your best dollars for it. If you want to stay in the business and you're not happy, you need to ask yourself, are you a contributor? Are you doing things to make the brand better? If you're a great operator, the brand's going to want to work with you on any issues that you have. If you're a bad operator, you're probably needing to get out and sell, right? So if you want to stay in, figure out how you can contribute to your brand. Because I think that's the biggest way to get rid of any of the issues. Anytime I've ever had an issue with any of my brands, any disagreements, it's been a phone call that fixed it. It's all about relationships. Maintain the relationships, improve them, give more than you take in both directions. And it's a good symbiotic thing.
And you can see on this map, states from coast to coast. We got blue states, red states, purple states, all on this map, where we in the last handful of years have seen franchise relationship proposals really take hold. And just this year, we've seen franchise relationship proposed changes up in Arizona, which we've mentioned, the state of Arkansas as well, and New Jersey. And we've got 3 great advocates on this call in Todd, Tom, and Jesse. And Tom, let's go to you next, because you testified on behalf of franchising in the New Jersey legislature earlier this spring. Tell us about that experience and what were you up against?
Yeah, it was interesting. One, I will say IFA and everyone is always very thankful that people come to testify. I don't think any thanks is necessary. I think it's well stated here. We all need to stick together in the model. The model does great things for a lot of stakeholders, and people do not understand it, and particularly legislators at times do not understand it. So it's incumbent upon us to share it with them. New Jersey was not super friendly, right? We waited. They were, in fairness to the legislature, that committee, they were wading into some really tough territory. There were some things that happened on both sides that probably covered up. The bill was, I'm sorry, the legislation that was looking to be passed was in the hotel space in that vertical. And it would have been fairly damaging. And I know it's still alive, so hopefully it will die at some point. But the long story short, there were, what I saw in that experience were both sides had good points. And because those good points were there, it kind of riled up the legislators. A couple of them were pretty angry. They were protective. They were looking to protect, in this case, franchisees. But we as franchisees realize a vast majority of franchisees would not have liked the outcome, however well-meaning that would have been. But because of that protective and that, they were upset and probably a little bit angry, it was a little bit of a hostile environment. But I think we have to look at ourselves because on both sides, because when that happens, we likely did something on both sides that created the issue, and we did not, as Jesse and Todd both pointed out, I think Jesse said it last, we did not communicate very well. So I do hope there was a little impact. Didn't feel like that day I was making a ton of impact, but I do hope there was. And I do hope that people take away from it the best way to solve these issues is internally. Going to a group of legislators that will unintentionally impact the business model is detrimental to everyone. In that particular issue, we also would have sought a fair amount of degradation of value in the hotel space, and that would have been very scary for anyone who's invested a ton of money there.
Tell us, how do brand standards help franchisees succeed?
Yeah, well, a lot of times, I think Tom stated it really well in terms of the New Jersey and going in and testifying. A lot of times there's good points on either side, but an issue oftentimes starts with a disgruntled franchisee. And so then that's when they start to lean in and say, oh, well, we've got to protect the franchisee. I think all understand that. The issue is that you have a vast majority of the franchisees that are good franchisees, and you have a vast majority of the franchisors that are good franchisors. They want to grow the system. They want to do their best in the system. And so they're oftentimes working together with their franchisees. And so when they license a brand, and when you partner into a brand, you're buying into that system. You're buying into intellectual property that you're working with other franchisees to share. You're trying to advance system standards. Like, for example, when Massage Envy started, they didn't have skincare. And so probably about 8-9 years into their existence, they had to add skincare. And so that took some innovation. It took some remodeling. It took some build out. It took some research. The franchisor did it, and a lot of franchisees tested it. Now, that could have gone poorly. It's gone very, very well. But the fact remains that when you have brand standards or system standards in a system, you're all sharing that same system. So if I'm a good franchisee in a good system, and all of a sudden there's a bad operator in my system, I want my franchisor to be able to have some strength in that agreement to get that bad operator out. Mm-hmm. And so if all of a sudden a legislature comes in and says, oh, well, wait a minute, we think we know better. How are they going to get into the middle of that arrangement, in the middle of that business contract, and try to make that change? And so that's where a lot of the franchise legislation at the state level becomes really difficult. What exactly are they going to step into and control? If you're a good franchisee in a good system, it's sort of like, don't mess with it.
So can you talk a little bit about franchise relationship proposals in the context of the diversity of so many different types of franchise systems?
this wasn't mentioned, but besides the Little Caesars that I owned for 19 years, I was also a Valpak franchisee. I've got a carpet cleaning franchise called OxyFresh, and I've got a operating agreement. It's a joint venture with Ideal Image Medical Spa. So besides the salons, I've got all these other things going on. Every industry is different, and what you can and cannot do for brand standards is completely different. Someone brought up Board of Cosmetology. Board of Cosmetology is going to trump any brand standards that are with that franchisor, where with my Little Caesars, I had the health department that would trump anything that would be brand, right? But the brand works on top of those local municipalities restrictions or compliances. I wanted to kind of go back to the brand, the power of the branding and brand consistency, as far as everything being the same from one location to another. It's, you know, sometimes we have as franchisees, we get angry that the franchisor has what we may perceive from time to time unrealistic brand standards or expectations. But one thing I noticed being a Valpak franchisee is, while most of my actual clients were other franchisees, most of my cold calls and sales were to mom and pop companies, right? And there was no brand standard from one location or theirs to other. It was just disorganized. And the other thing that I've noticed is that in any situation, whether it's a franchisee or a non-franchisee, when some people appreciate being held accountable and they grow from it. In our company, it's a proverb from the Bible that says iron sharpens iron, which means your peers will hold you accountable and make you better. That's what franchising does with their brand standards, is they hold you accountable. And the people that would have challenges with that are probably also the ones that also don't seek out additional coaching. I pay people lots of money to tell me what I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing right, because I need to learn and grow. So as far as the franchising and the laws, the brand standards should be something that you've already agreed to when you signed your FDD, that there was something that made you want to be a part of that brand. And I would always implore people, go back to that. Like, it's like the romance period of a relationship. What was special about that relationship in the beginning that you liked? Because it's still there underneath all the other thickness that's happened. And go back and revisit that, because those brand standards are only going to make you better as a business person.
So Todd, you briefly mentioned Julie Sue. Could Mike or could Mike go into some of the details about Sue's policies that would impact the franchise community?
Thank you, Anna. We can talk about Julie Sue that Todd brought up. Certainly the Julie Sue nomination for Labor Secretary and IFA's involvement in it. One of the most high profile things that I think the franchising community has ever done in the advocacy space. And the Julie Sue nomination, much like the lower profile David Weil nomination a year ago, are high stakes, because in this, particularly when Congress is gridlocked, people in Washington really are policy. And so people like Julie Sue, David Weil, are going to enact policies almost by fiat, unilaterally, that fit their ideological mold. And this is not for nothing. Julie Sue has a record in California of being a spokesperson and advocate for bills like the FAST Act to undermine the counter service restaurant space in franchising in California, AB 5, which would plainly demote every franchisee in California to a mere employee of their brand, and other policies that have been as far an extreme pro-union on one side and anti-franchising and small business on the other side. So we don't take these issues lightly. We've supported a number of nominees at IFA that are constructive for franchising, but if you're an opponent of this business model, we also don't take that lightly, and we've had some success sharing the franchise perspective with our friends on Capitol Hill. So, and on our final slide, I do want to flag, as we're always in the business of developing new advocates for franchising during these heady times. We encourage everybody to zap this QR code with your phone, join the Franchise Action Network, IFA's grassroots army of advocates, over 100,000 strong, so that you are in touch with us about developments in your states, like the map that we've shown on this program, and you'll also hear about how you can come to Washington, DC for the biggest IFA advocacy our biggest franchising advocacy event of the year right here in Washington, the IFA Advocacy Summit. You can register right now. If you are an IFA member with, if your brand is a member, all franchisees are automatically IFA members, and we'd love to have all of you. We thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you again to our special guest speakers, Jesse Kaiser, Tom Baber, and Todd Recknagel. We hope to see all of you in DC again at our IFA Advocacy Summit. And until next time, thanks and so long, everybody.